soldier and businessman. I might say an all-around nice guy. Sean, the floor is yours. No, before I do that, I never did. I stepped up my introduction. I wanted to introduce John Weston, also who's here. John, a very good friend of mine, by the way. Right? John, who hosts the WCRN, conservatively speaking, in the morning, and is a fixture at virtually every Republican event, particularly Tea Party type events in this greater, not just greater Worcester, but I mean all the way into inner Boston. After you have your remarks, John's going to ask a few questions that we're all sort of thinking about, and we'll certainly open up the floor to questions. Sean's kind of got a stop in about 45 minutes or so. So I hope, again, now, so without further ado, please allow me to introduce Sean Bielat.
Well, first of all, thank you everyone for coming. I say this to all the gatherings right now when we're in March. It's impressive that this many people showed up on a Sunday in March to talk politics. Most people are not tuned in yet. Many people won't tune in at all. So to get people who are active enough to take the time is something we should all be grateful in terms of democratic process. So I'm going to talk about a couple things today. First, sort of my background, why I'm running, and then why we're going to win in 2012. As Tom mentioned, I'm a Marine. I spent 4 years on active duty. I've been in the reserve for 10 years now. I've spent almost the past decade in business. Before I get to that, I went to Georgetown undergrad. I have a master in public policy from Harvard. Notice I don't say the Kennedy School. And I have an MBA from Wharton. With the business experience, having spent time in consulting to very large companies, having spent time in a robot company where I ran a $100 million business line, having spent time in a startup, I have the skills, I have the experience to recognize what it takes to create the environment that we need to create jobs, to create growth in this country. And as you think about the issues facing this nation right now, jobs and the economy are number one. The further south you go in this district, the more you hear that. In Newton and Brookline, when they talk up there, a lot of people want to talk about fiscal responsibility, which is sort of the second prong. The further south you go, the more people have been affected, the more their neighbors have been affected by the weak economy, by the loss of jobs, by unemployment, and so we really need to address those things. So the three areas that I spend a lot of time talking about are jobs and the economy, fiscal responsibility, and then finally, what should the role of the federal government be? How do we return to our constitutional roots? How do we return to a vision of government that's more consistent with this limited government that's laid out by this document that we all acknowledge is unique in the world, has established, we're one of the few nations anywhere that is established around a set of ideas written in one single place. And how do we preserve that? How do we preserve that uniqueness, and how does it manifest itself in our ideas of governance? So, starting on the job front, I think there's two basic levers that we can pull. The first is giving people back their money, giving businesses back their money to invest, to allocate as they see fit. Individuals, families are always going to know better whether they need to pay for a college fund, or pay off a credit card, or buy a new car. Government can never know how to do that. You stimulate the economy by allowing individuals to make those choices. The second way, though, is regulation. There are two statistics that I find very telling. The first is that, on average, the average job in America is associated with $10,600 of regulation on an annual basis. Talk about a tax, talk about a burden, and talk about a reason that we're not competitive with China and these other places where we're offshoring jobs. That's a lot. But the second part of it is predictability of regulation. So when I go around the district, I talk to people. Recently I talked to a gentleman who had a painting business, and he employed 2 other painters. And business was good. He could hire 2 more guys. But he was holding off because he didn't know what was coming next. He didn't know what his taxes were going to look like. He didn't know what health care was going to look like. He didn't know workers' comp. So with all these question marks, he decided not to hire those 2 people. That's 2 more jobs that weren't created. And so it's estimated in the last 4 years that 2.5 million jobs have not been created because of this uncertainty. So it's not even, in this case, a question of bad regulation or good regulation. It's a question of how do we know what's coming next? And under this administration, the last Congress in particular, we don't know. That needs to change. It's something that's easy to change from a technical perspective, and it's something that should be changed immediately. That's one thing I want to work on when I get to Congress. Second major area is fiscal responsibility. It's talking about the debt. It's talking about the deficit. And when you talk about the deficit, the annual deficit, you have to talk about two areas. The first is entitlements, the social programs that go on, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. And the second is discretionary spending, the spending that occurs each year that Congress has to approve. Entitlement spending has for a long time been called the third rail of American politics. And for a very good reason. If you touch it, you get zapped. Last time around, I talked about Social Security and the need to reform it. And one of the things you have to do is gradually raise the retirement age. Not on people currently in retirement, not on people approaching retirement, but on people like me, people like my 4-month-old daughter. You can make these changes without severely impacting them in a negative way and allow the system to be preserved to ensure that they actually receive the benefit. But as soon as you start saying something like that, you start getting hit. So a day after I first made a comment in the general election about that, ads started running. Bernie started running ads about Sean Bielat wants seniors on the street. Sean Bielat hates, the poor and the disenfranchised. And the thing is, those work. Our polling showed it. They showed my negatives climbing. They showed his positives climbing. And so that's why we see no progress on these difficult issues of entitlement, of necessary entitlement reform. And so it takes political courage. And I think you get there by never caring if you win the next election as long as it's on a policy issue. So if I don't get elected this year and it's because I'm talking about something that matters, like Social Security, I can live with that. If I get to Congress and I don't get reelected because of that, again, I can live with that. Because we need a nation of citizen legislators. We need people who go down, vote on their conviction, and spend less time figuring out which way the wind's blowing and how to navigate to get there. When we talk about discretionary spending, the largest piece of the spending that Congress approves each year is defense. As a result, it's where people look for savings. And there is savings to be had there, but not in the places that people immediately gravitate to. They're talking about pulling troops home from different places. They're talking about reducing the end strength of the Army and the Marine Corps, getting rid of soldiers and sailors, weapon systems. Nobody's looking at the fact that we have a 700,000 person civilian defense, 700,000 civilian employees of the Department of Defense. So these are people not wearing a uniform. They're people not directly providing combat capability to this country. Largely, they're
bureaucrats.
Thank you. They're bureaucrats. There's a lot of great people doing good work. I'll tell you, there aren't 700,000 people doing great work. I've met a lot of them. And so that's the kind of thing we ought to be looking at. We should be looking at acquisition reform. We should be looking at how do we maintain our combat capability and cut costs instead of going the other way. We're going in the wrong direction. We're doing it in a stupid way. That needs to change. The third major area, this constitutional vision of a limited government. And so I think there's probably a number of people here in this room who agree that the federal government has no authority constitutionally to impose an individual mandate for health insurance. Where does that come from? It's a stretch of the Commerce Clause, which says that Congress can regulate commerce between the states, but it's a huge stretch. And a lot of legislation these days, instead of starting with the base of, does the Constitution allow for this legislation, starts with the base of, when we get done with legislation, can we figure out a way to, put it under the rubric of the Constitution? That's a wrong way to look at things. It's the wrong way to do business, and we see the results of it in a lot of our legislation, in a lot of the problems we have in Washington today.
Water?
I am getting a little dry, but this is mine.
Oh.
There you go, one. Thanks. If it's bad enough that you noticed, I probably shouldn't have.
No, I just...
They're all skilled campaign aides here.
Apparently. So if we return to these base ideas, if we return to the balance of power, bring back power from the executive to the legislative. Right now, the vast majority of really what are laws, the rules and regulations that affect us on a daily basis, come not from elected officials, but from unelected career government employees. Again, these are smart people in many cases trying to do the right thing. They're not close to the problems of business. They're not close to trying to figure out how to support a family off of a government income. They're not opposed to trying to figure out how to hire more employees. And the more we can bring back the basic decisions to the Congress, which is immediately responsive, or should be, to us, the better outcomes we're going to get. So we want to push more and more power down to the states and local governments where, again, they're more responsive to us. The selectmen in the room, we can go and touch them. We can go and knock on the door and say, hey, this is what I think, and get a lot more responsiveness. Not true with people in Washington, and in many cases, not true with the government bureaucrats in all cases. So we need to return that balance. Those are the three issues I'm running on. Unfortunately, they're the same three issues I was running on in 2010. And the reason that's unfortunate is because nothing's changed.
Yeah.
Nothing significant has changed.
Yeah.
That is why we need change. That is why Massachusetts should, for the first time in 16 years, elect a Republican to represent them in the House of Representatives. And the reason we're going to be able to do that is manifold. First of all, an honest discussion about this race can't happen until you acknowledge the fact that this district is much better than the Old Fourth. If you looked at the Old Fourth on a map, you would see it gerrymandered down. It didn't make sense. It looked like a snake. It had New Bedford, Fall River, and then up in the north you had Newton, Brookline. Socioeconomically, it was 2 or 3 different animals. There just wasn't much commonality. And it was really built to protect Barney Frank. And it worked. It protected him. He stayed there 16 years and only had one real challenge.
16 terms.
16 terms. Yeah, I wish it were 16 years.
Yeah.
32 years.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, this new district, if you look on a map, even without knowing the first thing politically about who lives where, it looks like a cohesive entity. It looks like a reasonable district. And that makes a big difference because now it leans much further right. It's a 50-50 district. The last point, there was about a 20-25 point advantage for the Democrats going in. Now it's about a 50-50 district. So if you look at it, Charlie Baker lost by 1,500 votes, but it's 50% to 50% because it was so close. Mary Connaughton won 52-48. Scott Brown crushed it because almost his entire state Senate district is in this district. There's, out of 160 state reps, 33 of them are Republicans. 8 of those are in this district.
Right.
There's statistic after statistic that show that's the case. And so when you scale up based on my performance in the towns that are shared in the district, as well as the performance of an average between Mary and Charlie, what you find is we come out 6,000 votes ahead. That's a very small number, and it's a long way away, and it's a spreadsheet, not real life. But boy, is that a great place to be starting.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Boy, is that a great place. So the Boston Herald ran a poll not so long ago with me and Kennedy head-to-head, and it said among registered voters, I had 45% name recognition. The thing is, you never poll registered voters, you poll likely voters.
Right.
So among likelies, it's going to be a lot higher. I love the fact that I'm coming in with over 50% name recognition.
Yeah.
Again, that's a great place to start.
Right.
When they polled head-to-head, it came out 60-28 in Kennedy's favor. That means 2/3 of the people who knew who I was came my direction in the head-to-head. I love starting in that place. We had 1,700 active volunteers last time around. We've already recruited a few hundred more, and we already have a few hundred active. He does not have that. Kennedy does not have that, and it's not easy to buy. You can buy the time of union members and that sort of thing, but day to day, the people are going to sit in the office, make the calls, knock on the doors. Those have to be volunteers. They have to be people who are motivated by the cause. They have to be people who are going to get out and have the person-to-person interaction that wins elections. Because this race is going to come down to turnout. The more people come out, the better it is. And I feel great about that. Mitt Romney on the top of the ticket is not going to encourage many Democrats to come out. That cuts down the Obama coattails. Scott Brown is leading 8, 10, 12 points, depending on the poll, and in my district in particular, he's got a big lead. That helps as well. So we have a couple of strong Republicans on the ballot. We have a great district. We have a great volunteer force. Last time I raised $2.4 million from 23,000 contributors.
Wow.
So
Excellent.
I thought so. I was happy about it. I still got outspent by $2 million, mind you, but
Yeah, well.
it's great for a Republican. So we have a great fundraising day, and we're doing right now a lot better than we were 2 years ago at the same time. So all the pieces are there, all the parts are there, and what I need is you guys. What I need are all the people who come to these meetings to go out and tell 5 people, to get some of them to hold these meet and greets, to get involved in knock on doors, put up yard signs, to do all those sorts of things. And if we do that, we're going to win. So I thank you for being here today. I thank you for listening, and I ask your support throughout this election.